Hello, and welcome to episode 13, all about A Journey in the Dark, chapter 4, book 2 of Fellowship of the Ring, being the 13th part of That's What I'm Talking About. Hello, my name is Mary Clay. If that's too complicated for you, just call me MC. And today I am joined once again by Casey Winters from Hello from Elsewhere. Welcome, Casey.
Hello, I'm so glad to be back. Like Bilbo returning to Rivendell. Here I am.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really funny just kind of thinking back how you were on for the very first episode when I knew nothing. And now I know some things. So
now you're an expert.
Yeah, because in the first episode, I felt like I had like nothing to contribute to what you were saying, because I was like, yeah, I'm sure that's how it happens, and yeah, that makes sense. Cool, that sounds awesome. Right. And now I'm like, yay, we can actually like talk about stuff because I know what's going on a little bit. So
well, I'm curious. I'm just going to ask the question right up front. What are your feelings so far, like as a whole? Because so far you've been looking at each chapter by chapter, but I'm curious what you're feeling, what's great, what's frustrating, what's interesting.
I think one of the most frustrating things for me is just the pacing and how it feels so slow going at this point. And I'm sure once I'm able to like zoom out when I'm either done with this book or done with the whole series, I'm sure I'll be able to zoom out and be like, wow, what an epic story. But right now in the like nitty gritty of like, and then the previous chapter was mostly them just being in a snowstorm and figuring out how to survive it. And I'm ready for like the more epic things to happen. I know certain things that happened in the next chapter, which I'm sure will like get the ball rolling. Yeah, that was a very long-winded answer to your question of I don't know. And I'm also afraid that this experience of reading it one chapter at a time, like one chapter a week, I'm afraid that experience is like gonna ruin Lord of the Rings for me, or I'm not going to enjoy it as much, because I feel like I might be able to enjoy it more if I could just keep reading on, but I have to make myself stop.
But definitely pros and cons. I appreciated just reading this chapter for this episode, because this is one of those chapters where I'm reading it because I know stuff's going to go down afterward. And so it allowed me to just like take a breath and just appreciate this chapter by itself. Mm-hmm. So I think there's benefits to it as well.
Yeah, I'm interested to like see what my own, ask myself that question again a couple of times further down the road. So
you're just like Frodo going through the journey of your own. It's very meta.
Exactly. I think I made like a very similar joke in the previous episode that Casey, you haven't heard yet because it hasn't come out yet at this point that we're recording. But I said basically everyone in the like Aragorn and Gandalf are my guests who know everything and know what they're talking about and know where they're going. And then I am the hobbits. And then, I don't know, I guess the listeners are Gimli and Legolas and who else is there? I don't know, Boromir.
Then who's Tom Bombadil? That's the question.
No one is Tom Bombadil. Tom Bombadil is the internet waves that allow you to. He is the ether that allows you to be listening to this podcast. He is an intangible object.
I love it.
So jumping into this chapter. They are regrouping after a very treacherous journey through the mountain where they almost froze to death and basically so in the previous chapter, they mentioned Aragorn and Gandalf were off by themselves talking about, oh yeah, there's this dark and dangerous, scary, evil path that we could go. And Aragorn is like, I'd rather not, but if it comes to it, I guess we'll get there when we get there. And now it's time. As I correctly predicted, the mere mention of this evil dark path means that they were going to have to follow it at some point. So they decide, I'm flipping through the book to get to the right chapter. And it just amazes me how, there's not that much left in this book. I've read a lot.
Yeah, it's getting toward the end.
Here we go. Yeah, and they have decided that this is the path they're going to go. They are going to have to go through the mines of Moria, which Gimli is stoked for, and everyone else is like, no.
I love Gimli in this chapter so much. He's just I just wrote Gimli, eager beaver. That's him in this chapter. Yeah. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and we'll learn a little bit more later about why Moria is so important to him and the dwarves. And Pippin and Merry, so basically as they're deciding how to move forward and where to go from here, there was also the suggestion of, well, we could just cut our losses, turn back, and go back to Rivendell. And Pippin, Merry, and Sam are like, that sounds great. Let's do that. And it just feels so on brand for them to be like,
right.
Like in the 1 chapter ago, they were all arguing, trying to be a part of this journey. And they're like, take me with you. And Merry basically says, like, you'll have to chain me here if you don't want me to go with them. I am going. And then now they're like, okay, this is kind of serious. Can we...
They're the kids that beg you to go to the grocery store. And then once you get there, they're whining the whole time.
Man, like, honestly, the comparison of hobbits to toddlers and or children pops up so many times as I'm reading this book, because it's so accurate. And yeah, they decide that they are going to go through the mines of Moria. And they are all scared of it. Gandalf kind of asks for everyone's opinions, and everyone just says, no, let's not do that. Even Aragorn, which is what, like, if Aragorn says, no, let's not do this, I feel like you should not do this. But
right, this chapter starts on such an ominous note from pretty much every character except for Gimli, and even from the narrator. Like, everything is pointing toward that this is not a good trip through the mines here.
Yeah, and everyone's just saying, no, I don't want to do it, not me. And Gandalf says, of course not. Who would? But the question is, who will follow me if I lead you there? So Gandalf is like, yeah, this is kind of scary and evil, but who's with me?
Well, I love before that, when they're still discussing it, and Boromir suggests going like a different way, like going far to the north or far to the south.
Oh, yeah.
And Gandalf's like, were you not even, what does he say? He says, did you not hear what I told you of Sauron? It makes me think of the first Guardians of the Galaxy with Drax. And Drax is like, when did we establish that? And Quill's like, 3 seconds ago. And Drax is like, oh, I wasn't listening. I was thinking of something else. Like, Boromir is Drax in this chapter, and I'm here for it.
Boromir is... I really hope he gets better, because at this point, he's almost the worst. Boromir talks about... I'm glad you pointed that out, because I actually highlighted that point. Yeah, Boromir talks about, well, when I came here, I walked through this land and this mountain, and everything was fine then. And Gandalf is like, did you not listen, boy? It's all changed. Saruman and I have beef. There's no way he's going to let us go near him or any of that area. Did you not pay attention? Which is so funny, because in the previous chapter too, I think Bilbo, they're talking about the council, and Bilbo's like, yeah, everyone learned something new. And Gandalf is like, not me. I knew everything. I know everything. Yeah, so they begin the journey to... Oh, wait, where... At some point... And this happens several times in this chapter. Gandalf makes references, or the way he describes how long it'll take, he describes it in such vague terms. And they ask, well, how long will it take to get there? And he says, 15 miles as the crow flies, 20 as the wolf runs. What does that mean? Can't you just say, like, oh, it's like, 25 miles that way? Like, and
I think it's him trying to be more ominous again, because they know wolves are on their tail, and so he's just bringing up wolves again. That's kind of mean, almost scaring everyone.
And then the last chapter they had this flock of ominous bird spy, like flying over them basically and following them. So, but yeah, I'm like, come on, Gandalf, just at least give a straight answer for once in your life. And so yeah, they are super excited let me rephrase that. Gimli is super excited to go to Moria, and the rest of the gang is nah. To me, it feels like, so I went to Edinburgh a couple years ago with some friends, and while we were there, I made my friends and I do this like at night underground ghost tour of Edinburgh, and them going to Moria feels like me making my friends go to this ghost tour. And I was Gimli, and my friends were the rest of the Fellowship because they were not about it. And I was like, Ghost, this is awesome. Let's do it.
So if there were ghost hunters in Middle-earth, this is where they would film it, is Moria.
Zach Bagans going into the mines of Moria. I'd watch it. And then
there's a few places in Middle-earth that they could go to, but this is definitely one of them.
Well, it's funny you say that because I made several jokes that I should have a episode where I just try and talk to Tolkien via Ouija board, and I'm all for this. I mean, we're getting into spooky season proper. It's almost October. Let's do a Ghost Adventures episode in Middle Earth and and talk to Tolkien via Ouija board.
Perfect.
So as they are stopping for the night, this pack of wolves comes near them, and they're called wargs. So is that just like a evil kind of wolf, I'm assuming, or a different type of wolf?
Yeah, they're bigger, but they're just, basically evil wolves that the orcs have befriended and sometimes ride them.
So then I guess they're pretty big then, if they ride them.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's terrifying.
They're like wolves the size of horses. Yep.
Oh, gosh.
Which is great.
That's terrifying. Oh, that's terrifying. And so they start attacking, and everyone's there's a great paragraph where it's like, Aragorn passed his sword with a thrust, with a great sweep Boromir hewed the head off another. Beside them, Gimli stood with stout legs apart, wielding his dwarf axe. The bow of Legolas was singing. So everyone's like all hands on deck for these wolves. And then Gandalf comes in with this spell that lights everything on fire, basically, and makes it all go away. And I'm like, why didn't you just do that from the start? Literally no one would have had to step in and do anything if he had just done that spell.
But we needed that money superhero shot of all of the characters using their weapon, you know?
Yeah, I'm just imagining the cameras circling them a la the Avengers, the first Avengers movie.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then, Legolas is taking his bow out like Hawkeye, and Gimli's throwing his axe, and I don't know, maybe it's a boomerang and it comes back to him a la Thor's hammer. Who knows? So Gandalf's spell is this. So all of these words that I'm not going to say because it's not English, it's a spell of some kind. So is it Elfin language, or is it just a different language altogether?
I believe it's an old Elvish, but I don't know, actually. That's okay. A good question. Yeah, there's multiple Elvish languages, then there's Dwarfish, and then there's the Black speech of the orcs, and there's a lot of languages here. But I'm not sure which one this is for sure.
Okay, we'll find that out later. I'm assuming, maybe.
You're not going to try to speak it for us, Mary Clay?
First of all, considering, if someone ever makes a bingo card for That's What I'm Talking About, the free space is Mary Clay messes up reading a passage. Because I cannot, for the life of me, get through, a sentence without stumbling over my words. Because apparently I don't know how to read. Which apparently is also running some kind of joke that Tyler made on Bacon and Eggs at one point. So I guess the Bacon and Eggs squad is just screwed. None of us know how to read properly. But it says, there was a roar and a crackle, and the tree above him burst into a leaf and bloom of blinding flame. The fire leapt from treetop to treetop. The whole hill was crowned with dazzling light. And this is basically when all of the wolves leave after this. This is the thing that makes them go away. And I, in my mind, liken this to when I'm playing Zelda Breath of the Wild. Sometimes, so a wolf will see you, and all of the other wildlife animals, when they see you, they run away. But the wolves, when they see you, they will come over and try to attack you. And me being a dog lover, I'm like, I don't want to kill you. I don't want to kill you. Please don't make me kill you. And then as you're left with no choice but to kill them or run away until they stop following you. And as soon as you kill one of them, the rest of them run away. So that's what I likened this to. As soon as a couple of them were dead, they were like, oh, maybe we're going to lose this fight. Let's get out of here. Oh, and then Sam makes a nice comment earlier. They were a little worried about if Gandalf knows what he's doing, which at some points in this chapter we find out he does not at all know what he's doing. But Sam tells him something like, whatever is going to happen to Gandalf, I can tell you he's not going to get eaten by wolves. And then all of this happens and Sam says, what did I tell you, Mr. Pippin? Wolves won't get him. That was an eye-opener and no mistake.
Yeah, this chapter is definitely really focused on Gandalf. And yeah, knowing what's to come, possibly, that we kind of know why. But it's I wouldn't say a deconstruction of Gandalf this chapter, but he is brought down a few pegs multiple times throughout this chapter.
Yeah. And he also just has like such a tude in this chapter.
Yeah.
He's so awful. He's so awful to Pippin all of the time. And I don't know why. There's a line at some point later on that I highlighted specifically, but he's so awful to Pippin and he's so awful to Boromir too, which I don't mind him being awful, but like sometimes I'm like, okay, that was just uncalled for, sir.
Yeah, like he randomly tells Pippin that he's gonna use his head to smash the door in.
Yeah.
And later, I really love the relationship for Gandalf and Pippin, and I can't quite say why without spoiling things for the future. But one of my favorite things, and I love the movies, and one of my favorite things about the movies is that this relationship has really been preserved. This kind of annoyed fatherly relationship, and more than annoyed, almost toxic. I don't know how to describe it, but you're right. It is kind of sad, and Gandalf has a tude, as you said, is probably a good way of putting it.
Yeah. And I mean, luckily, like, Pippin seems resilient enough that he's just like, oh, Gandalf, and isn't really bothered by it. So maybe that's why it's just constantly roasting him. But so they, after the next morning, they discover that there's no sign that there was any kind of like wolf fight at all the night before, because all of the bodies, it's all gone. And Gandalf is like, yep, those are not normal wolves. Well, it's a good thing we're going to Moria, so it won't matter anymore. So they are traveling, and when they get there, or as they're getting closer, they eventually stop to have a conversation that just breaks my heart. They realize that they have to let Bill the pony go. And I was just kind of like laughing and was just in shock as I was reading it, / listening to it, because I had just recorded the episode on chapter 3, and I said, like, I swear, if anything happens to this pony, how dare you, Tolkien? Like, how dare you make me care about this horse? I don't even like horses, and now I care about Bill the pony more than, like, any of the other characters at this point. Right. And I'm like, how dare you?
What's worse is, if you love Bill the pony, you probably shouldn't watch the cartoon.
Oh, no!
Because there's the Watcher in the lake that we'll talk about in a moment with the tentacles and Bill the pony nearby. I'll just leave it at that.
Oh no!
So his fate is much less violent here.
I wonder if there's a special section for Bill the pony on, what is it? It's called like doesthedogdie.com or something. I wonder if they made an exception or something for Bill the pony for the Lord of the Rings stuff. Oh my gosh.
So I wanted to say something real quick before that part. They're walking toward the gates of Moria, the gate that Gandalf hasn't been through on this side. And they come to the big lake, right? And Gandalf says, "There are the walls of Moria," said Gandalf, pointing across the water. "And there the gate stood once upon a time, the elven door at the end of the road from Holland, by which we have come. But this way is blocked. None of the company, I guess, will wish to swim this gloomy water at the end of the day. It has an unwholesome look." And I just pictured in my head, as he's saying all this gloomy stuff, Gimli just running past him and just cannonballing right into the lake. I just had that image in my head.
He's like,
Moria, I'm back.
He's like, all right, I'll see you guys over there. Last one to Moria is a rotten egg.
He's just so excited, and Gandalf's being gloomy.
It's funny you say that too, because at one point, when they're talking about Bill the pony and they're telling Sam about him, Gandalf basically says, "Well, I mean, it's either Frodo or the pony," and I just pictured Sam being like, "All right, bye," and just grabbing Bill the pony and running off into the sunset, and like that's the last you ever see of Samwise Gamgee.
Oh, perfect.
So they get to the gates. And there is this fun little riddle. Oh, well, actually, first, as they're kind of walking through, I guess a river or pond or stream or something, and Frodo makes a comment that, like, this is gross, I can feel everything underneath my feet and it's slimy, and just kind of setting up this idea that, like, the water is gross and creepy. He's like that person when you go to the beach and you're all in the ocean and, like, a piece of seaweed touches his leg and he's like, oh, nope, I'm out of here. Yeah, so they get to the gates and we get a brief little history lesson, I suppose, about the relationship between dwarves and elves. And they're talking about what Moria and the gate used to be like, and how a lot of times it was just left open and people would come and go through it. And Gandalf says, those were happier days when there was still close friendship at time between folk of different race, even between dwarves and elves. And Gimli says, it was not the fault of dwarves that the friendship waned. I had not heard that it was the fault of the elves, said Legolas. And then Gandalf gives such a, like, politician's answer and says, I have heard both, and I will not give judgment now. So I'm assuming that's either history that Tolkien himself created to set everything up, or I don't know if that's, like, covered it all in The Hobbit, but it's one of those things that I'm like, well, I'll find out more later.
Yeah, I think it's more Silmarillion stuff, if I remember right, because I haven't read all of the Silmarillion, but I know some things about it. And so I believe that the dwarves and elves were friends long, long ago, back before Sauron was evil or presented himself as evil. And at one point when the elves and men started battling with Sauron, the dwarves kind of just hid away in the mountain here in Moria, kind of just running away from the problems of the world. And that's kind of how they survived the War of the Second Age, I believe.
Sure. That sounds right to me. That sounds right to me, who has almost zero knowledge of any of this world. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to go into the Silmarillion and talk about all the history and stuff, and unless I, like, figured out a way to do it in a really, like, fun, creative way, because I feel like it would just get kind of boring real fast it would be like a history podcast at that point. So I don't know. Listeners, do you have opinions? Let me know. So they are standing outside the gate. Oh, well, actually, first of all, so this is when they officially tell Sam that they have to let Bill the Pony go. And Gandalf gives him this, like, almost, it's like a fake blessing, basically. He says, you are a wise beast and have learned much in Rivendell. Make your ways to places where you can find grass, and so in time come to Elrond's house or wherever you wish to go. And then he says, there, Sam, he will have quite as much a chance as escaping wolves and getting home as we have. So, I don't know, that just kind of made me laugh, that Gandalf kind of gives this, like, fake acknowledgement of the fact that, like, Bill the Pony is just is both as well equipped and doomed as the rest of them.
Right. He couldn't have said that in Elvish and it would have been great. An actual spell.
It could have been like,
there, Sam, he's good.
He could have just said it in Elvish, but, like, made up a blessing, but it sounds really words. Profound and beautiful. And then Sam is like, oh, thank you so much for the protective spell. But Gandalf, like, was actually saying, like, good luck, you horse. I hope you don't die in Elvish.
He was just reading his to-do list.
Yeah, he's like, go to grocery store, drop off package at post office.
Save hobbits.
There's an episode of Parks and Rec where the Native American tribe that's, like, in Pawnee, the chief says he's gonna curse, like, the fair that they're holding, because it's on, like, grounds where there was, like, some kind of battle, but basically everything in Pawnee is super problematic. So anyway, and he places this fake curse. And then at the end of the episode, they have him do, like, a curse removal ceremony for the media and the press. And he is speaking in his Native American language, and the captions show up and it says, like, I am saying nothing. You all are just going to believe whatever I say.
It's like doobie, doobie, doo.
Yeah.
As he throws the dust or whatever.
Yeah, and he's just Oh, that's so good. So now they come up to the gate, which in my version, I got an illustration of the gate / door. And I was like, wow, this is nice. A nice little surprise. So yeah, they get to the gate and, backtracking. They give a little history about this door and gate and explain that it's invisible unless you know where it is. And then you have to have this password. And it just seems like they made it unnecessarily difficult. Like it's one of those things of like, you only know where it is if you know where it is. I'm like, dwarves, you could have like done something a little bit because they talk about it later too, how they don't know the password because that information is long gone and like died with the last people who are the last dwarves like years and years and years ago. That just seems like important information that like you should pass on or, you know, do something else so that if the last person who has this knowledge dies, this isn't like lost forever.
It's such a dwarf thing to do. And there's a similar doorway, in The Hobbit, actually, that it's even harder and more impossible to get into than this. So it just must be a dwarf thing, I guess.
It's a dwarf thing. You wouldn't understand. So Gandalf finds it doing whatever Gandalf knowledge he knows and is like, yeah, I suspected it would be about here, and reads the inscription on the door. It says, "The doors of Durin, Lord of Moria, speak friend and enter." And then underneath it says, "I, Narvi, made them. Again, I have never read words like this aloud until now. Celebrimbor of Holland drew these signs." There we go. Oh, so basically that's just created by, that's just like a artist credit at the bottom. Artist, like illustrated by, written by. Anyway, yeah, so the message says, "The doors of Durin, Lord of Moria, speak friend and enter." And I immediately was like, oh gosh, this is just a bad riddle, isn't it? The password's friend, isn't it? And later on we find out, sure enough, the password is friend, because it just says speak, comma, friend, comma, and enter. And
the importance of punctuation.
Yeah. Yeah, it just honestly reminded me of like a bad riddle. And that's what the dwarves put their trust in, was a bad riddle. So
I love this part though, because it's another instance where Gandalf has brought down a few pegs.
Yeah.
And you have to think about, well, first of all, there's this connection between Gandalf and say like Aslan. C.S. Lewis has been brought up a lot. Mm-hmm. And Aslan is a very perfect character, but Gandalf is definitely not. And yeah. I think here Tolkien is looking at these characters that are meant to be all important and all knowing, and in a way, Tolkien being a professor, I'm sure he knew people that were like this, that thought they knew everything, or people thought they knew everything, but they really didn't. And even Tolkien might have seen it in himself as well. What's really interesting too about this is that in the movie version, maybe this is a mini spoiler, but Frodo is the one that tells Gandalf, hey, what's the Elvish word for friend? And then Gandalf realizes it, which I actually really like that, in that much of the story is all about small people, surprising the people that are supposed to be all-knowing and all-powerful. So
yeah, I like that too. Yeah, Gandalf struggles here for a bit. He tries out all of these different spells and tries speaking in different languages and different combinations of words. And then he ends it with, he threw his staff on the ground and sat in silence. So Gandalf just kind of like has a little tantrum and is like,
who's the toddler now?
Yeah. But yeah, he's just like trying. Oh, wait. And this is when, so they're talking about Pippin is like, so what are you going to do when Gandalf says that he doesn't know what the password is? Gandalf says, knock on the doors with your head, Peregrine Took. But if that does not shatter them and I'm allowed a little peace from foolish questions, I will seek for the opening words. So, man, Gandalf just...
He's got a temper when he's stressed, for sure.
Which he's very stressed at this point, because he also, I think on their way here, they make a comment of, or he makes the narrator, whoever, makes a comment that they came up a little, like, north of where Gandalf thought they were. And there's all these references to like where Gandalf thinks they're going to be in the journey or how much he knows. And then them kind of being proven wrong a little bit and just realizing there is a lot of slow realization throughout this chapter of like, he does not have all the answers. He doesn't know exactly what he's doing or where he's going. And now he has these. He feels that failure on
his shoulders, which is probably why he's lashing out at people. But he failed to take them, you know, the mountain Caradhras, that path failed. And now he's taking them this way, which he doesn't know as well. And he recognizes as probably more ominous. So yeah, I think it's just little failures after little failures are starting to add up.
Definitely. And so while he's trying out all of these things, man, of course it's Boromir who does this. So Boromir, they're standing at the lake and Boromir like just picks up a rock and kind of throws it into the water. And it says, "The stone vanished with a soft slap. But at the same instant, there was a swish and a bubble. Great rippling rings formed on the surface out beyond where the stone had fallen. And they moved slowly toward the foot of the cliff." So, and then Frodo says, "Why did you do that, Boromir?" And they don't know exactly I don't know if it was that action that awakened the beast that attacks, like, further down the page, but I was just like, of course it's Boromir who did it. And then, then Gandalf... Oh, which, by the way, the Elvish word... Yeah, then Gandalf realized, oh, of course, it's friend. And the Elvish word for friend is melon, which I don't know why. Yeah. That just made me laugh, because melon, to me, is such a, like, everyday human word.
Well, in the movie, and they had linguists coaching the actors on pronunciation. Ian McKellen pronounces it melon, but in our head, we're all just saying melon. Let's be honest.
So as this is all happening, this is when, just the worst, like, I just cringed reading this. Something sneaks up from the waters and grabs Frodo's ankle. It says, "The others swung around and saw the waters of the lake seething as if a host of snakes were swimming up from the southern end. Out from the water, a long, sinuous tentacle had crawled. It was pale green and luminous and wet. Its fingered end had hold of Frodo's foot and was dragging him into the water." Oh, just gross and awful. God, awful.
And aren't you glad Bill the Pony wasn't involved?
Yeah, and then Bill the Pony runs off, and literally it's a moment where Sam has to choose between Bill the Pony and Frodo.
Slow motion, looking back and forth.
Yeah, Bill the Pony gave a wild neigh of fear and turned tail and dashed away along the lake and into the darkness. Sam leaped after him. Then hearing Frodo's cry, he ran back again, weeping and cursing. So Sam...
Poor Sam.
Yeah, was issued an ultimatum and chose Frodo, which I guess, okay, fine.
But I also love the heroism of this moment, because it says that Sam, got down on his knees and starts hacking at the tentacle with a knife, which I don't know if that means hobbit knife or tall person knife. That's a sword. Yeah. I don't know. But either way, Sam is trying really hard. And then it later says that he was the only one doing anything. Everyone else was kind of frozen in fear, which is a pretty awesome Sam moment.
Yeah. Oh, then it's, after he starts cutting away, it says 20 other arms came rippling out. Oh, just awful. Oh, I also it says the dark water boiled. That's just gross. Oh, God, I hate it. So we know what will be haunting my nightmares for a while now. And so then finally everyone's like, and then they spring into action. And then they run, after Frodo's free, they run they run inside through the gate, and then the gate closes. And Sam is just like, poor Bill, I hope he's okay. And then they are now in the mines of Moria. So
here they are.
Yeah. So my question is, they constantly say like they're in Moria and then also the mines of Moria. So is it all one and the same, or is Moria like also this mountain that the mines are under?
The mountains are called the Misty Mountains, and I think Moria and Mines of Moria are probably interchangeable.
Okay.
As is the next chapter is called the Bridge of Kazzadoom. Kazzadoom is the older name for this place. Eventually the name was changed, but yeah, Moria or Kazzadoom is a very, very old place. It's the mansion, the house of the first dwarf that ever lived on Middle Earth. So it's very old.
I feel like Tolkien just never wants you to forget that, like, hey, by the way, remember, this place has also 20 different names from 20 different languages or people, or he just loves all of those names.
Yeah, for sure. He's, I mean, you've said it before and I've said it before and other guests have said it before, but he is very interested in the history of it. And part of history is just how things shift and change over time. And the ages of Middle Earth are very long. So.
Yeah. So they are plunged into darkness, basically, because they're in the mines underneath these mountains. There's obviously like no windows, no sunlight getting through. And luckily, Gandalf's staff also functions as a flashlight. And Gandalf and Gimli lead the way, even though I guess his thinking is that Gimli has Gimli like ever been here before, or is Gandalf's thinking just that like, oh, Gimli the dwarf might have some understanding of what's going on based on what he's heard?
I'm pretty sure Gimli has not been here. I think he's just excited because of the stories he's heard and that his dwarf friends and family came here to take back the mines from the orcs. But he doesn't really know what they're getting into here. I think I could be wrong. Gimli may have been to Moria, but I'm pretty sure he hasn't. Okay.
I like how every now and then Tolkien will give a description of how they're walking and like who's in line in what order. And he says that in the dark at the rear, grim and silent, walked Aragorn. So clearly Aragorn's not happy to be here, but I don't know, it just kind of made me laugh, like a little angsty Aragorn moment.
It kind of describes his character in this chapter. He kind of is just hanging back for a lot of it. And he's not really present. A lot of the other characters have more presence in this chapter.
Yeah.
Because
they're
kind of a bummer,
like out of his territory now, because he's so used to being a ranger. He's so used to knowing what the land is and where they are and knowing what to do and where to go and everything. Because up until now, he and Gandalf have kind of been consulting each other on a lot of things, and then now he doesn't know what else to say. And then the next passage, he's telling everyone, he says, "Do not be afraid. I have been with him on many a journey, if never on one so dark." So he is kind of going into this supportive role of like, yeah, this isn't that great. I know we're all worried, but it'll be fine because it's Gandalf. I also like that the rest of the group, while Gimli and Gandalf are kind of standing off, deciding which way to go or which path to take, I like that the rest of the group is kind of standing off to the side, like gossiping about what's happening and talking. And we don't see any part of the conversation that leads up to Aragorn saying, "Do not be afraid," but we can assume that everyone else is like, so is anyone else concerned about how Gandalf doesn't really seem to know what's happening here? Again, once again showing that Gandalf doesn't know everything, which is concerning. Yeah, basically I was like reading through my notes and I was like, that can't be the next like significant thing that happens, but it's just a lot of walking. It's a lot of literally stumbling in the dark and not knowing what's going on or where to go. Tolkien mentions at one point that the wound from the riders that Frodo has given him some like heightened senses, and he can hear things and see things better, which I was kind of confused about because aren't ringwraiths blind?
They can kind of see the shadow realm. I think they are blind in the daylight, but I think they can see better at night, if I remember right.
Okay, so if they can see better at night, then I guess that would make sense that it's given Frodo some kind of like night vision or whatever, that he can now see better in the dark.
Well, and I made note of this. I noticed how often eyes and watching came up in this chapter, and it was generally equated to something evil. They thought they saw eyes in the woods with the wargs, and then of course Frodo, when he can see better in the dark, but it's because of this evil thing, this evil wound, and then Frodo keeps seeing something or someone following, and he thinks he sees luminous eyes in the distance.
Yeah.
So eyes come up a lot. And then even Gandalf mentions toward the beginning of the chapter about they have to be careful where they're going because of the watchful eyes of Saruman and the enemy. And I was trying to remember, Mary Clay, you can help me here. At this point in the story, do you know what Sauron's physical form is? Do you know what he looks like at this point?
I do not. My only idea of what it is or reference so far that it's made is at one point Frodo says that there's a like bright red star or something in the sky, and he feels like it's always just watching him. And I just kind of made the assumption that, oh, that's the Eye of Sauron, just because I've seen like memes and jokes about like the Eye of Sauron and stuff like that. Especially there's this one meme that it says Sauron, Sar off, and it's the Eye of Sauron in black and white is Sar off. And it gave me a good chuckle, but that's about all the extent. The only idea I have is that there is an eye.
Yeah, so I think it's worth noting all the imagery of eyes and watching in this chapter. And even, I don't think it says it in this chapter, but even the creature in the lake is called the Watcher in the Lake. So yeah, there's just a lot of watching,
creepy.
A lot of peering.
Yeah, because Gandalf,
darkness.
let me go back, because Gandalf, when they get inside and the creature's gone, it says, this is talking about Gandalf. He did not speak aloud his thought that whatever it was that dwelt in the lake, it had seized on Frodo first among all the company. So yeah, this idea that the creature had honed in on Frodo because it has some deeper sense and knowledge that this is the evil one, or not the evil one, but this is the one carrying the evil ring. Right. This is the one who, because of his wound too, has been touched by darkness. So and then also it really feels like, Big Brother is watching, in the sense that all the time they're talking about like, well, they started a fire because they weren't trying to hide from, the eyes anymore, because they knew that they were watching already, so there was no use in not putting up a fire, or, like just a lot of, you are right, there are lots of references to being watched, and just this sense that whatever this evil force is, it's just looming over them.
It's interesting you mention Big Brother as well, because 1984 came out around the same time, and George Orwell would have been a contemporary of Tolkien. So
that's so
I'm
weird.
sure that was in his mind too.
I don't think I'd ever thought about that. I think also in my mind, I always just, like my dumb brain is just like, oh yeah, 1984. It came out in 1984.
Right. Yeah. You would think.
Yeah. I haven't really thought about, besides Lewis, I haven't really thought about who else, like, of quote unquote classics that like you have to read in high school or something. I hadn't really thought about what else was out at this time or coming out. But that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure if they had a relationship or anything. I don't really know of Tolkien's relationship with Orwell, if they knew each other or not. But 1984 was published in 1949, and Lord of the Rings was just a few years later. So they're very close to each other. Man,
that's crazy. It's so fun. It's like when people say that Anne Frank and Martin Luther King Jr. were born, I think, in the same year. If Anne Frank had lived, they would have grown up to be, the same age. But we never think of it that way because we associate them with two completely different time periods. Right. And that kind of feels like Orwell I associate with like dystopian social commentary, and then Tolkien is, this creator, inventor of fantasy. So
absolutely,
that's crazy to think about. Anyway, if I was like a smarter person or was in school or something, I would love to do like a deep dive into like fantasy and like kind of base it around Tolkien, but like go into a dive of like fantasy and how we go into the creation of genres, and how we as a society decide like, oh yeah, 1984, that's like what we're going to place value on versus other books that came out about that same time, and why we didn't place value on them. But anyway.
Yeah, it's all very interesting for sure.
Yeah. So, we were talking about Frodo's heightened senses, and this is another one that just makes me go like, ooh. It says, yet Frodo began to hear or to imagine that he heard something else, like the faint fall of bare feet. It was never loud enough nor near enough for him to feel certain that he heard it, but once it had started, it never stopped. But it was not an echo, for when they halted, it pattered on for a little all by itself and then grew still. So I'm just imagining like wet feet pitter-pattering, and there's a slight echo because they're in these mines, and it's dark so they can't see, and clearly something is following them. And I just wrote down Gollum, which you do not have to respond to if it's a spoiler.
I so much want to talk about the significance of feet, because Tolkien makes effort to mention the feet and the echo of footfalls multiple times related to whatever or whoever is following them. But I don't want to talk too much more about feet because it'll give it away. But yes, feet.
Oh, which also a side note, I guess I kind of have always like known in the back of my head that like, oh yeah, I guess the hobbits just kind of like walk around barefoot all the time. And when they're walking through that lake and Frodo's talking about like, oh, this is gross, I don't like this feel, I was kind of like, oh, so I guess they really are barefoot, aren't they? Just kind of something you forget about as you're reading it, but...
Right. Tolkien doesn't mention the hobbits' feet too much as they're walking, but yeah, they are barefoot for sure.
And so they stop and they go off into this they stop for the night for a longer rest, and they go into this little cave or crook. And there's a big hole in the middle of it, which Gandalf is like, don't go in there he's like, I'm the one with the light, let me walk in. And they go in. Sure, there's a huge hole, which Sam, I think it was Merry and Pippin would have been the first ones in there, so they would have fallen in it. And it's so deep. So Pippin is curious about how big this is or how far down it goes. And he throws a pebble down and it echoes. And it just makes like just noises that just startle the whole group. And also given how Boromir threw the stone in the lake earlier, and that's what like made the beast emerge or startled whatever, possibly, this is it could start off very ominously too. And Gandalf, this is when Gandalf is just, he says, fool of a took. This is a serious journey, not a hobbit walking party. Throw yourself in next time, and then you will be no further nuisance. Now be quiet. Gosh, he's awful. So which, up until now, I've been like, man, I love all of these like digs that he's getting in, especially like... And it's not even that it's not that I don't like Pippin. I've just kind of made several jokes about how Merry is the best of the hobbits because he's the one that seems to have a level head and know what's going. Right. And he seems to be, I don't know, the more aware of the two. And so I just kind of make jokes that, like, no, Pippin is not the better hobbit. It's obviously Merry. So it's funny when Gandalf is kind of backing me up on that claim that Pippin's not the best one. But now I'm like, Gandalf, what did Pippin ever do to you? Like, it's just so uncalled for.
This is especially hard for me. We named my daughter, her middle name is Pippin. And I tend to call her Pippin more than her first name. And so it's funny to read this and think about her instead of Hobbit Pippin. But Pippin is my favorite. Merry is definitely a better hobbit. He's more capable. I just love Pippin's, just how naive he is. And he is the most childish of them all, I think.
Yeah, it's exactly as Gandalf says, fool of a took. Or took. I always want to say, is it took or took?
I've heard it either way, or either way.
Fool of a took. True. Accurate. Oh, I'm just flipping through my notes, and I hadn't flipped to the next page when we were talking about it, but when Bill runs off, I wrote, bye, Bill, best of luck, and then a frowny face with a single teardrop, so.
Bye, Bill, hope you find your dad.
Bye, buddy.
Except not, because his dad would be Bill Ferny, and we don't want him to.
Yeah, we don't want. Man, I just love that they unintentionally rescued this like poor, abused, nearly dying animal. Because when they get him, Butterbur, I think, makes the comment that he's probably not going to last long because he looks like he's about to die. And then as they're on this treacherous, perilous journey where they make several references too to how Frodo's losing weight and he's getting more in shape. And meanwhile, Bill the pony is just gaining weight and he's living his best life.
Right.
He's like, I don't know what y'all are talking about. This is great. He's like, I got friends. I got grass. This is what else could you ask for? So,
can we talk about how creepy the hole is in the ground for a second?
Yeah.
So Gandalf's upset, so he makes Pippin take the first watch. And it says, Pippin sat miserably by the door in the pitch dark, but he kept on turning round, fearing that some unknown thing would crawl up out of the well, which, great. Thanks for that nightmare.
Yeah.
I'm not big into horror movies, but I have seen The Ring. So I know scary things will come out of wells much more than they're likely to just stroll peacefully through a door. So Pippin did make the right choice here to just watch the hole in the ground, the well, instead of the door.
Also, it's definitely a horror movie trope of here's this dark opening that you don't know anything about. And I can definitely picture in my head if like they were, I don't remember exactly if this part was in the movie or not, and if it was, what happened then. But if they like wanted to get a jump scare in, it would be really easy to do with this part where like you just show a shot of like Pippin slowly like leaning over to look down, and then all of a sudden like a tentacle shoots up and grabs him. Like that's how horror movies
you know it's coming, but it scares you anyways.
Yeah, with these like dark, ominous holes of uncertainty. So Gandalf eventually, he hasn't been sleeping at all because he's just been decided. So the reason they decided to stop and camp out for the night is basically because they've come to a fork in the road and Gandalf doesn't know which way to go. So he's just been sitting there all night contemplating and thinking about what to do. So finally he gets up and lets Pippin sleep and decides this is a great time for a smoke. And when they get up and start getting in the morning, this is where Gandalf totally jinxes them. He says, "Things have gone well so far, and the greater part of the dark road is over." And as soon as he said that, I was
Don't say that.
It's like, well, that's it. You just signed your death warrant. Which, given that, I can't remember if we were recording or not when I said this, but listeners, just so you know, I accidentally spoiled myself, and I know that Gandalf dies in the next chapter, which, I don't know, every time I, like, accidentally spoil myself or something, I just hear, like, in the back of my head, like, da-da-da, oops, I did it again. So yeah, Gandalf dies in the next chapter. Spoiler alert.
I like that your spoiler conscience is Britney Spears. That makes me happy.
Yeah. But yes, Gandalf jinxes them with this, like, yeah, things are going great. Let's keep going. And then we get a little history lesson about why Moria is so important to the dwarves. Because it's this, like, dark, like, big, scary, empty place. And like Frodo, I think it's Frodo who either says or thinks that he can't imagine it ever being this like thriving place where there's lots of life and where people want to be here. He's like, why would people ever want to come here? And it's not because of like treasures or anything. It's because the mines have this really, really valuable kind of silver called mithril. Sure. Let's go with that. And we also find out that the armor that Bilbo gave to Frodo is made out of this really valuable silver, which, I don't know, it's just kind of funny that they mentioned that Thorin gave Bilbo this gift, and they're like, I wonder what happened to that. Anyway, and Frodo's just like, meanwhile, like, Frodo's like tugging down on his shirt, making sure that it's covered up.
Well, I like that Gandalf just assumed that Bilbo had let it gather dust in the Matham house, we've come full circle.
Yeah.
But clearly it sparked joy for Bilbo, and he brought it along with him. So
yeah, it sparked joy. Which I'm so glad it did, because finally, like, Frodo is equipped with something somewhat useful and helpful on this perilous journey. So, and as they're traveling or sitting, again, Frodo has this feeling that something else is watching. Yeah, I think it's when they're sleeping or when he's on watch. And he fancied that he could see two pale points of light, almost like luminous eyes. Ugh, creepy. And I think because the way that Dobby is described in the Harry Potter books is, like, the biggest description of him is about his eyes and how they're like big glowing orbs, basically. And that's kind of what I'm just imagining now, is like Dobby's eyes just blinking in the distance in the dark. Except for these ones are obviously a bit more ominous. And once again, I'm like, Gollum, that you?
It's funny you mentioned Dobby because so in preparation for this episode, I found it was more like a radio drama of Lord of the Rings, not an audiobook. I had thought it was an audiobook, but I was wrong. And I was just listening to this part, and whoever they had the voice of for Sam sounded more like Dobby, and it was very unsettling. You know, it was Mr. Frodo must not go to Hogwarts this year. And it was just like, that's not how Sam should sound. And it was, yeah. So I stopped listening and just decided to read the chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a, I hate when that happens when you're listening, because that's happened to me a couple times just in general with audiobooks, is I'll start playing it, and sometimes it's the way that a character or the narrator narrates a certain character. I'm like, I can't listen to this anymore. Like, this is gonna ruin the whole book for me. And that's a shame, because otherwise, I don't know, like, who even has time to actually read books now? Says the person who has a podcast about reading a book. But this will probably be like the only book that I've read all year, just because I never actually sit down to find the time to read anymore. So, listeners, if you're wondering how to read more, start a podcast about it. So they do. It's funny because when they're talking about Moria and the history and everything, I was just starting to wonder. I was like, wow, I can't believe like we've done this entire chapter while they're walking and everything, and there hasn't been any singing yet. How has that not happened? Because like the acoustics must be great in the mines. How have they not sung? And then that was like exactly when Gimli like starts a song about Moria. But anyway. Oh yeah, so my next note, they're talking about Balin. And is this something I missed, or is this a Hobbit thing? Who is Balin?
Yeah, he's one of the dwarves that's in the party that is in the Hobbit.
Oh, okay. Which makes...
But you don't really need to know that much about him, honestly. He's a lot of those dwarves in the Hobbit are somewhat interchangeable. I might get flack for that, but sadly they are. They're only differentiated by like the color of their belts and their hats. That's pretty much
that's
it.
Funny.
So
yeah, so as they're kind of coming to the top of the mines, I guess, about to come out on the other side of the mountains, and everything's looking up, and that's when all this time they've kind of been wondering about the whereabouts of Balin, and Gimli has been hoping that they would stumble into him. And so as they're kind of nearing what they think is the end of the mines and about to leave, they come across some runes and kind of a tomb, and we find out that Balin, son of Fundin, Lord of Moria, is dead. Dun, dun, dun. But yeah, so my notes were, who is Balin? And then my next note is, oh, he's dead, so I guess it doesn't matter anymore.
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
But it's important to Gimli. He's sad about that.
Yeah, it says...
His light is gone now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the chapter's last sentence is, Gimli cast his hood over his face. So yeah. Which is, that's definitely very sad for Gimli, because he was the one who was stoked to come to Moria, because it's like, it's the place that the dwarves have been hoping that they could win back and take charge of once again. And for him to come to this place finally that he's heard about and has a big piece in his people's history, and then find out that the king, because he does, I think in the beginning of the chapter, he mentions like, oh yeah, like maybe we'll find some clues about where he went or what he's up to. And then we find out that he's dead. So it's like in Mulan when they stop singing A Girl Worth Fighting For really abruptly, and they come to the battleground, and it's just like, oh wow, they're dead. And then what's his name? Shang finds his father's helmet. Kind of like that. So Gimli is Mulan. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, that's funny that you mentioned that, because that was sort of the image I had of when Gimli is cannonballing into the lake, which is canon, let's be honest. I had that same image of all the naked men running past her into the...
He's like, see you guys, I'm out.
It all comes back to Mulan.
Lord of the Rings is actually Mulan. And that's how this chapter ends. Casey, what did you think of that chapter?
Like I said, I was happy to just focus on this one, because I was eager to get to to 5 because big things happen and the action ramps up. But I really appreciated the symbolism in this chapter. Like I mentioned, the eyes. There's also a lot of, we didn't really talk about it much, but a lot of light and dark symbolism in this chapter as well. I mean, it's called A Journey into the Dark. And the chapter even starts on a note of talking about what the light is like. And at one point before they get into Moria, it's really bright and sunny outside, but it doesn't ever lift their spirits because they know the darkness that's to come. And there's just a lot of little hints like that I appreciated about this chapter. Yeah. And I also appreciated how much of a focus there is on Gandalf and how he is not a perfect mentor. And that's important for going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, the chapter title. Yeah, we didn't talk about the chapter title, but it's both literal and metaphorical because A Journey into the Dark, they're going into these dark mines for a very long time. Oh, which I didn't mention, but I did write down, just going back to what I said about how Gandalf is really vague about his, what do you call it? Like measurements of journey. What are the...
Of distance,
yeah, that's it. And he said, they're asking, like, how long do you think it'll be while we're in here? And he says, like, 3, maybe 4 marches. This is just one long march. Like, what does that even mean? Just say, like, we'll probably be here for 2 days. Like, right. Anyway, but, yeah, it's literal darkness because they're in the mines. And then, yeah, this metaphorical darkness because Gandalf doesn't know what's going on, so they're in the dark about a lot of things, literally and metaphorically, because they're just kind of following Gandalf around, who they're just trusting him blindly. Like, we don't have anything better to put our faith into at this point, except for this wizard who has a flashlight staff. So sounds like a solid plan.
Well, and to add another layer to the metaphor as well, we also get hints at what could be to come for Frodo, and we wonder the darkness that's ahead for him. You know, the hints of his wound and just that journey into maybe a more spiritual darkness, I guess you could call it. So there's just multiple ways you can look at this chapter, which I appreciate. Yeah,
it's almost like Tolkien is a good writer who
right.
who has multiple layers to what he's writing about. So
exactly.
Well, Casey, where can people find you on the internet?
Sure. I co-host a podcast, Hello from Elsewhere, with my wife, who is amazing, Valerie. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at elsewhere_pod. We have a lot of fun on our podcast. We sort of explore the themes and symbolism of movies and sometimes books, and we cover all kinds of stuff. Lord of the Rings comes up, but Star Wars, Harry Potter, Marvel, it all comes up, and we have a lot of fun. So you can check us out. We're on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, and it's really fun also if you are just a general fan of like pop culture too, because it's not just one thing. I liked y'all's episode about the other lives of Hollywood stars.
Oh yeah.
And I also love that Valerie picked I forgot his name, but it's the guy from You've Got Mail in the
Steve
bookshop.
Zahn.
Yeah.
We love Steve Zahn. We talk about Steve Zahn all the time.
Well, I also just love You've Got Mail, so
right.
That's a great movie. And then I also love that. Almost said Ron Swanson is right. But Nick Offerman.
Oh, Nick Offerman.
I just love that Nick Offerman is Ron Swanson, but just less.
Right. But also that he wants to be Tom Bombadil, which is fitting for our discussion here.
Yeah. Cool. So That's What I'm Talking About is a production of Bacon and Eggs. You can learn more about them by going to baconandeggs.media. The cover art is by Graphite, aka Vaishon Brandon. You can support him on Instagram at graphite.vmb. You can find the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at TolkienAboutPod. You can find me on Twitter at MCWatt416 and Instagram at MCTurnedDownForWatt. And then I think this is probably the last week. I'll leave the link in the description. I want to show my thanks and appreciation for this first round of listeners in the early years. I say early years. This podcast is going to be like 2 years long, I think, maybe. I don't know, but...
As the crow flies, yes.
Yeah, if you want a fun surprise in the mail, you can follow the link in the description and enter your information so that you can receive that surprise. And I think this will be the last week I do this, unless Ethan and Tyler tell me otherwise. So, with that being said, do you have any final thoughts?
No, just thank you so much for having me back on. It was delightful. I love your podcast. I look forward to every week. So I'm just ecstatic to be here, and thank you.
Yay, thank you. I'm always surprised when people tell me they listen to this podcast. And that's what I'm talking about.